I'm Jason, 32 years old, and the founder of Connectr, a social media platform now worth billions. Growing up, my family seemed normal, supportive parents and a sister I adored. That changed last Thanksgiving when my parents asked me to legally change my last name. Why? Because my excessive success was overshadowing my sister Rebecca's struggling acting career. They actually researched the legal process before bringing it up over turkey dinner. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt pressured to dim your light for someone else's comfort. Looking back, the signs were always there. I grew up in a modest 3-bedroom house in a Seattle suburb, where our backyard bordered a small creek that Rebecca and I would explore every summer. She was 4 years younger than me, and I remember feeling this innate responsibility to protect her, to be the big brother she could count on. We built forts in the living room, caught frogs together, and I'd let her win at board games just to see her smile. Those early years felt magical, but as we grew older, subtle differences in how our parents treated us began to emerge. My father, Robert, worked in marketing for a local firm. He was pragmatic, always talking about realistic expectations when it came to my interests. My mother, Karen, had been a dancer in her 20s, quite talented according to the faded newspaper clippings she kept in a box under her bed. She never made it beyond the local company before she met my dad and settled down. There was always a wistful look in her eyes when she watched dance performances, a glimpse of what might have been. When Rebecca showed interest in performing at age 6, putting on little shows in our living room, my parents' faces would light up in a way I'd never seen before. They enrolled her in every performing arts class they could afford: acting, dancing, singing. Our refrigerator became a gallery of Rebecca's performance photos and casting call flyers. She has the spark, my mother would say, the one I had before. And she'd trail off, looking into the distance. Meanwhile, I discovered computers when I was 10. Our school had just gotten a computer lab, and I was fascinated by how these machines worked. I'd stay after school learning everything I could. When I told my parents I wanted a computer for Christmas, they seemed confused by my interest. "Wouldn't you rather play sports like the other boys?" my dad asked. They eventually got me a second-hand desktop, but it was clear they saw it as an odd hobby, not a passion worth nurturing. When I created my first website at 14, a platform for local bands to share their music, my dad glanced at it and said, "That's nice, son," before immediately turning the conversation to Rebecca's upcoming audition for a regional theater production. Rebecca's headshots cost $300. Her acting coach was $200 per session. The gas for driving her to auditions in Portland and Vancouver added up. The special summer performing arts camp was almost $4,000. I overheard my parents arguing about money more than once, but they always found a way to make it work for Rebecca. "She's going to make it big someday," Mom would insist, "and then it will all be worth it." My academic achievements, straight A's, science fair wins, coding competition victories, were acknowledged with quick congratulations before the conversation inevitably turned back to Rebecca. I remember winning the state mathematics Olympiad in 10th grade. My parents couldn't attend because it conflicted with Rebecca's community theater performance of Annie. She was in the chorus, not even a named role. "You understand, don't you, Jason? This is important for her future," Mom explained. I did understand, perhaps too well. I was the reliable one, the one who didn't need the constant attention and validation. I was the smart one, who would be fine no matter what. Rebecca was the special one who needed their support to shine. I don't blame Rebecca for this. She was just a kid soaking up the adoration and encouragement. She didn't ask to be the favorite. She was cast in that role by our parents. But as we entered our teens, I started to withdraw, focusing my energy on my own interests and future. If my achievements weren't going to be celebrated at home, I'd find validation elsewhere in the digital world, where your last name and family connections didn't matter, only what you could create. By 16, I was building websites for local businesses, making decent money that I saved for college. My parents seemed surprised when I mentioned the savings account. "That's good, son," Dad said, "but don't get too caught up in all that computer stuff. There's more to life." That same week, they took out a small loan to fund Rebecca's participation in a prestigious acting workshop in New York. The irony wasn't lost on me. I became the invisible child, not because I wasn't achieving, but because my achievements didn't fit the narrative my parents had constructed about who their children were supposed to be. Rebecca was the star they had pinned their hopes on. I was the backup plan, the practical one. By the time I graduated high school as valedictorian, I had already accepted that my path would be one I'd walk largely alone. When I received a full scholarship to MIT, my parents were pleased mostly because it meant they wouldn't have to help with tuition. That money could go toward Rebecca's career instead. "We always knew you'd figure it out," my dad said, clapping me on the back. I nodded and smiled, but inside, a determination was hardening. I would succeed spectacularly on my own terms. Not to spite them, but to prove to myself that I didn't need their validation to be worthy. MIT was where I truly found my people, other computer geeks, who understood the thrill of solving complex problems and building something from nothing but lines of code. My dorm room became command central for late-night coding sessions, whiteboard diagrams, and endless debates about the future of technology. College wasn't cheap, even with the scholarship covering tuition. I worked 3 part-time jobs, morning shifts at a campus cafe, weekend tech support for the university, and remote web development for clients I'd built relationships with back home. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford, but I was hungry for knowledge and determined to graduate without asking my parents for a dime. During my junior year, an idea began taking shape, a new kind of messaging app that connected people based on shared interests rather than existing social circles. I called it Common Ground and developed it for my software engineering project. It was rough around the edges, but my professors were impressed. One suggested I consider commercializing it. That summer, I landed an internship at a mid-sized tech company in San Francisco. There, I met Miguel Diaz, a brilliant UX designer who saw potential in my app concept when I showed it to him during lunch one day. We stayed up all night redesigning the interface, and by morning we had something that looked professional rather than academic. "This could be something big," Miguel said, his eyes bloodshot but excited. "We should work on this for real when the internship ends." After graduation, while my classmates accepted lucrative job offers from Google and Microsoft, I took a risk. Miguel and I moved to Silicon Valley, rented a tiny apartment with a converted garage, and lived on ramen and determination. We refined the concept into what would eventually become Connectr, a platform that made meaningful connections in an increasingly isolated digital world. Our workspace was a cliché: 2 folding tables, second-hand laptops, and walls covered in post-it notes and wireframes. I slept on an air mattress that slowly leaked throughout the night, requiring reinflation every evening. Miguel took the couch with broken springs that jabbed his back. We showered at the local gym where we had the cheapest possible membership. But none of that mattered. We were building something we believed in. Funding was the first major hurdle. We were unknowns with an unproven concept entering a saturated market. 10 venture capital firms rejected us outright. The 11th meeting with Blue Horizon Ventures started just as poorly. Social media. In this market, what makes you think you can compete with the giants? The lead investor asked, already checking his watch 5 minutes into our pitch. Instead of responding with words, I pulled up our prototype and handed him my phone. "Just try it for 3 minutes," I said. 20 minutes later, he was still exploring the platform, nodding and occasionally chuckling at the connections it was making for him. We walked out with $500,000 in seed funding and a mentor who believed in our vision. The next 18 months were a blur of 18-hour workdays, rapid iteration, and exponential growth. Our team expanded from just Miguel and me to 50 employees crammed into an office space designed for 20. We hired engineers who turned down positions at top tech firms because they believed in what we were building. The platform evolved based on user feedback, becoming more intuitive and addictive with each update. The tipping point came unexpectedly. Aidan Miller, a major film star, mentioned Connectr during a late-night talk show appearance, describing how he'd used it to find fellow vintage motorcycle enthusiasts. "It's like the real deal, man," he said. "Not like those other social apps where everyone's just showing off. On Connectr, I'm just a guy who loves Harleys from the 70s. Overnight, our user base tripled. Then, quadrupled. Servers crashed under the load, and we worked 72 hours straight to scale the infrastructure. 2 months later, Blue Horizon led a Series B funding round that valued the company at $100 million. Through all this growth, I called my parents every Sunday as I had since leaving for college. Our conversations followed a predictable pattern, brief questions about my computer job, followed by lengthy updates about Rebecca's latest auditions and near misses in Hollywood. She almost got a recurring role on that hospital show Mom Would Gush. The producer said she was their second choice. I never mentioned the funding rounds or the growing media attention. Some part of me was waiting for them to show interest, to ask specific questions about my work. They never did. The IPO was never my goal, but as Connectr approached 50 million users, going public became the logical next step. I was 30 years old when I rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange, watching as our company's valuation soared to $11 billion in the first hour of trading. The media attention was overwhelming. My face appeared on the covers of business magazines with headlines like "The Connection Revolution" and how Jason Reynolds reinvented social media. I gave interviews where I tried to focus on the technology and our mission, but journalists were equally interested in the overnight success story of the founder. Despite my newfound wealth, my lifestyle remained relatively modest. I upgraded from the air mattress to a comfortable but not extravagant apartment in San Francisco. I bought a Tesla because it was electric, not because it was a status symbol. The most significant change was being able to donate to causes I believed in, primarily educational initiatives bringing technology to underserved schools. Work remained my primary focus, not out of necessity anymore, but passion. Connectr was evolving beyond its original concept, and I was determined to guide its growth responsibly. My personal life took a back seat during these years. A brief relationship with Sarah, a marketing executive I met at a conference, ended after 3 months when she grew frustrated with my work schedule. "It's like you're married to that company," she said during our last dinner together. "There's no room for anyone else." She wasn't entirely wrong. I had spent so long working toward this success that I didn't know how to balance it with personal relationships. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd created a platform to help people connect meaningfully, yet struggled to do so in my own life. Throughout this whirlwind period, I never flaunted my success to my family. Part of me hoped they might notice on their own, perhaps see an article or hear from a friend about what I'd built. When I finally mentioned the IPO during a phone call, my father's response was underwhelming. "That's great, son. Smart move in this economy. Say, did we tell you Rebecca got a call back for a commercial national campaign? Could be her big break." I remember staring at my phone for a long moment. After that call ended, sitting alone in my office overlooking San Francisco Bay, feeling strangely empty at what should have been the pinnacle of professional achievement. While I was building Connectr from the ground up, Rebecca's post-high school path took a different direction. Despite having decent grades, college wasn't part of her plan, a decision our parents fully supported. The day after graduation, she packed 2 suitcases and moved to Los Angeles, convinced that Hollywood was waiting to discover her. "This is her chance," Mom said as they helped her move into a tiny studio apartment in North Hollywood. "She needs to strike while she's young and fresh." They paid her rent for the first year, something they'd never offered to do for me, calling it an investment in her future. Dad dipped into his 401 Kelvin to cover the security deposit, first and last month's rent, and a professional portfolio of headshots from a photographer who charged $4,000. Rebecca's early months in LA followed the classic struggling actress narrative. She worked as a waitress at a trendy restaurant on Sunset Boulevard where celebrities occasionally dined, hoping to be noticed. She attended cattle call auditions, where hundreds of beautiful young women competed for minor roles. She took acting classes 3 nights a week, with our parents covering the $800 monthly tuition. Her first break was a non-speaking role as coffee shop customer number 3-inch, a cable television show that was canceled after 1 season. You can barely see her in the background, but my parents recorded the episode and watched it so many times the DVR file became corrupted. Did you see how she reacted when the main character entered that subtle shift in posture? That's real talent. Mom would say, pausing and rewinding the 3-second clip where Rebecca sipped from an empty cup. I sent congratulatory flowers for every small role. She landed a local mattress commercial, an extra in a mall scene, a single line. "The doctor will see you now," in a medical drama. I wanted to be supportive, to be the sibling I wished I'd had. But as years passed, the big break remained elusive. Rebecca cycled through periods of desperate optimism and crushing disappointment. She'd call home after promising auditions, certain this was the one, only to learn days later that the role went to someone else, someone with more experience, better connections, or simply a different look. Our parents' retirement savings dwindled as they continued funding her career. Acting coaches, dialect lessons, cosmetic dental work, a nose job she insisted was necessary. They said my profile was too strong for the camera, and eventually rent subsidies when the restaurant cut her hours. It's just temporary. Dad would assure Mom when they thought I couldn't hear their late-night phone conversations. She's so close. Everyone says she has what it takes. As my own career flourished, Rebecca's resentment began to simmer. Her Instagram posts about me evolved in a telling way. Early on, they were genuinely supportive. So proud of my big bro landing that tech job in SF number smarty pants number family pride. Later, they took on a competitive edge. Different paths to success. While some of us code, others create art number, actor's life number. The struggle is real. By the time Connectr went public, her social media became a study in contradictions. Public congratulations, followed by vague posts about people who had everything handed to them, or got lucky while others worked for years. The most troubling development came when I learned, not from Rebecca or my parents, but from a tech journalist doing a profile on me, that Rebecca had started using our shared last name as a calling card. "Your sister mentioned you're close," the journalist said during our interview. "She's an actress, right? Said you two discuss creative collaboration all the time." We hadn't spoken in over 2 months at that point. As my public profile rose, Rebecca increasingly found herself referred to as Jason Reynolds' sister in the small industry publications that covered her minor roles. Casting directors who had previously ignored her suddenly expressed interest when they made the connection, not because they saw talent, but because they hoped for access to me or investment in their projects. Rebecca began getting invited to tech industry events as my presumed +1 even when I wasn't attending. She'd show up anyway, networking with investors and founders, handing out her acting resume, alongside casual mentions of her brother's company. My parents called frequently with opportunities for Rebecca requests thinly disguised as casual suggestions. That streaming service that wants to partner with Connectr Rebecca would be perfect for their original content. She's been studying that exact genre. Or your company must need actors for commercials, right? Rebecca's between projects right now. Perfect timing. I offered genuine help instead to pay for film school, or a degree in theater arts to fund a showcase where she could perform material that truly highlighted her abilities, even to produce an independent film where she could star. She refused every offer. "I don't need your charity," she said. "I'm doing this on my own merits." Meanwhile, she moved into a luxury apartment she couldn't possibly afford on her earnings from occasional commercial work. When I asked about it during a rare lunch together, she vaguely mentioned investors in her career who were betting on her future earnings. I later discovered our parents had taken out a second mortgage to cover her new lifestyle. Her boyfriend at the time, Derek, was another struggling actor who seemed suspiciously interested in her family connections. He would call me directly, pitching startup ideas that were thinly veiled attempts to get funding. When I declined, he'd suggest that I didn't support the family or believe in Rebecca's world. Rebecca's audition rejections continued, but now came with a more painful twist. She'd hear feedback through her agent. "We loved her, but we're not looking to cast someone with industry connections right now. We want an unknown." Or worse, we're concerned the audience would just see her as Jason Reynolds' sister, not as the character. Her resentment crystallized into a narrative where my success was actively harming her career prospects rather than just failing to help them. In her telling, casting directors were rejecting her precisely because of me, not because she lacked the training or talent that thousands of other actors in LA had invested years developing. My parents absorbed and amplified this perspective, calling me with increasing frequency to discuss how my high profile was becoming a real problem for Rebecca. "Couldn't you just keep a lower profile?" Mom suggested after my appearance on the cover of Business Insider. "Maybe turn down some of these interviews." Rebecca had a director tell her directly that they didn't want the distraction of her famous brother. I pointed out that I rarely gave interviews and actively avoided the celebrity side of tech entrepreneurship. "Well, it's not enough," Dad said. "She's really struggling with this. You need to understand how hard this industry is." The painful irony was that throughout this period, I continued supporting them all financially, paying off my parents' credit card debt that had accumulated, funding Rebecca's career, covering their property taxes when they fell behind, even anonymously funding the independent film festival where Rebecca finally landed a supporting role. All while being cast as the villain in our family story, the selfish success whose achievement was somehow an act of aggression against his sister. Thanksgiving had always been our family's most important holiday. Even during my leanest years at MIT, I'd fly home for those 4 days. This particular November, I arrived at my parents' house with more apprehension than usual. The phone calls had grown increasingly strained with pointed questions about my publicity strategy and suggestions that I was overshadowing the family. Still, nothing prepared me for what happened. The house looked the same. As always, Mom's collection of autumn-themed decorations covering every surface. The dining room table extended with the old card table to accommodate the 4 of us, plus my Aunt Linda, who lived nearby. The familiar smell of turkey and Mom's signature sage stuffing filled the air. Rebecca arrived last, making what felt like an intentionally dramatic entrance in oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, as though she might be recognized by paparazzi in our parents' suburban neighborhood. Traffic from LAX was brutal, she announced, though I knew she'd driven, not flown. Dinner began with awkward small talk. Mom asked about my computer business, as she always did, never remembering or acknowledging that I ran a publicly traded company with thousands of employees. Dad mentioned the neighbor's son who had also gone into computers and was doing something with websites for a local bank. Rebecca dominated the conversation with stories about auditions and industry connections, name-dropping celebrities she'd glimpsed at restaurants or passed in studio hallways. Chris P. and I made eye contact at Earth Cafe last week, she said, as though they were friends. After dessert, when Aunt Linda had gone home, Dad cleared his throat and announced, "We need to have a family discussion." Mom nervously rearranged the leftover pie slices as Dad continued. "We've been concerned about something for a while now, and it's time we addressed it directly." I braced myself, assuming this was about money. Perhaps they needed a larger loan for their mortgage, or Rebecca's career had hit another expensive roadblock. Instead, Mom pulled a folder from the sideboard drawer and slid it across the table toward me. Inside were printouts about legal name changes in the state of Washington. "We've been researching this," she said, her voice quavering slightly. "It's actually quite straightforward." Researching what I asked, though, a sick feeling in my stomach told me I already knew. "We think it would be best for everyone if you changed your last name." Dad said, his tone suggesting this was a perfectly reasonable request. "Legally, I mean. You could use your middle name, or your mother's maiden name, something to create some professional distance." I stared at them, waiting for someone to laugh to reveal this was an elaborate, if tasteless, joke. No one did. "You want me to change my name?" I finally managed. "It's not that we don't appreciate your success, honey," Mom jumped in, reaching for my hand across the table. I pulled away. "It's just that Rebecca's at such a crucial point in her career, and the connection is becoming problematic." Rebecca sat silently, examining her manicure, not meeting my eyes. "Problematic," I repeated the word, feeling foreign in my mouth. Dad slid a stack of printouts toward me, entertainment industry blog posts and articles, where Rebecca was referred to as Jason Reynolds' sister, or sister of tech billionaire Jason Reynolds. "You see," he said, as though these proved his point. "It's all they see when they look at her. Not her talent, not her years of hard work and training. And this is somehow my fault," I asked, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. "No one's blaming you for being successful," Mom said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But you don't need the family name for your career anymore. You're established. So, Rebecca is still trying to make her mark." I looked at my sister, who still wouldn't meet my gaze. "Do you want this too?" I asked her directly. She finally looked up, a flash of something resentment crossing her face before she composed herself. "It's just really hard living in your shadow, Jason. Every audition, every callback, it always comes up. Oh, you're that tech guy's sister. Never just Rebecca the actress." I've never once used our relationship to promote myself or my company, I said. I've kept my family life completely separate from my professional life. That doesn't matter, Mom cried, suddenly emotional. Your face is on magazines. People recognize your name. So I should change my identity because I've been successful. Do you have any idea how insane that sounds? Dad's face hardened. We're just asking you to consider what's best for the family. For your sister. She has real talent, Jason. She could really make it if given a fair chance. A fair chance, I stood up, unable to remain seated. I paid for her acting classes last year when you two couldn't. I covered the security deposit on her new apartment. I've offered to fund her own projects so she could showcase her talent without depending on casting directors. That's different, Mom interjected. That's just money. You have plenty of that. The casual dismissal of my support, financial and otherwise, felt like a slap. But it was her next words that truly cut deep. You know, I gave up my dancing career for this family, she said, tears forming. I had real potential. My instructor said I could have gone professional. But I sacrificed for the family we wanted to build. The implication was clear. She expected the same sacrifice from me. Karen, my father said, his voice gentler. Now let's not get into all that. But the damage was done. In one moment, my mother had revealed the heart of the matter. Her own unfulfilled ambitions now transferred to Rebecca, with me cast as the obstacle rather than the supportive brother I tried to be. Do you know we had to take out a second mortgage last year? Dad suddenly admitted, his voice strained. Rebecca's showcase. The new headshots. The acting coach who works with A-listers. It all adds up. We're not asking for more money. We're just asking for this one thing that could make a real difference. I looked around at the three faces watching me. My father's practical determination, my mother's emotional manipulation, and Rebecca's entitled expectation. In that moment, I realized a fundamental truth: they didn't see me as a person with my own identity and journey. I was either a resource to be tapped or an inconvenience to be managed. I need some air, I said, grabbing my coat. Jason, don't be dramatic, Mom called after me. We're just having a family discussion. But it wasn't a discussion. It was an ambush, a coordinated attack on my very identity. I drove aimlessly around my old neighborhood, past my high school, past the library where I'd spent countless hours teaching myself to code when we couldn't afford a better computer. Places that had formed me, shaped the person who had gone on to create something valuable in the world. In my hotel room that night, I finally broke down. My phone buzzed with texts from friends back in San Francisco wishing me a happy Thanksgiving, but nothing from my family. No apology, no recognition of how deeply they had hurt me. Just silence, as though I was the one who had done something wrong by refusing to erase my identity for Rebecca's comfort. The pain was physical, a hollowness in my chest that made it hard to breathe. All my life I had worked to make them proud, to earn the recognition they had always lavished so freely on Rebecca. And now, at the peak of my success, they wanted me to literally give up my name, the most basic marker of identity and belonging. For the first time, I allowed myself to really feel the truth in their eyes. My success would always be less important than Rebecca's potential. No achievement of mine would ever be enough to shift the dynamics established in our childhood. I fell asleep still in my clothes, tear tracks drying on my face, with a decision forming in my exhausted mind. It was time to redefine what family meant to me. The flight back to San Francisco the next morning felt like crossing a boundary between two lives. As the plane climbed above the clouds, I gazed out the window, physically leaving my family behind, but carrying the weight of their rejection with me. Back at work, I threw myself into projects with an intensity that surprised even my closest colleagues. 14-hour days became my norm. If I was exhausted enough, I reasoned I wouldn't have to think about Thanksgiving or the folder of name change documents, or the look on my mother's face when she compared her abandoned dance career to my success. Miguel noticed first. We'd been friends long enough that he could see through the forced smiles and excessive productivity. "You're doing that thing again," he said one evening when everyone else had gone home and I was still reviewing product specs for a feature that wasn't due for months. "What thing?" I asked without looking up from my monitor. "The thing where you try to code your way through emotional stuff." He perched on the edge of my desk. "You came back from Thanksgiving different. What happened?" I hadn't told anyone about the name change request. Speaking it aloud would make it real in a way I wasn't ready to face. But Miguel's genuine concern cracked something open in me. My family thinks my success is a problem, I said, finally pushing away from my desk. They actually asked me to change my last name legally so I wouldn't overshadow my sister's acting career. Miguel's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. They what? Once I started talking, I couldn't stop. The whole story poured out: the childhood dynamics, Rebecca's struggling career, my parents' dwindling retirement funds, the ambush at Thanksgiving dinner. That's some toxic garbage, Miguel said when I finished. You know that, right? That's not normal or okay. They're still my family, I said automatically, the response ingrained from years of making excuses for their behavior. Family doesn't ask you to erase your identity, Miguel countered. Family celebrates your success, not punishes you for it. His words stayed with me that night as I lay awake in my apartment staring at the ceiling. Was I the unreasonable one for refusing their request? Was my reluctance to change my name selfish when it could potentially help Rebecca? The questions plagued me through sleepless nights. During the day, I maintained the appearance of the confident CEO, but privately I was unraveling. After a particularly bad night, when I found myself standing on my balcony at 3 a.m., wondering if any of my achievements meant anything, if my own family couldn't value them, I knew I needed help. The therapist, Dr. Levine, was direct in a way I appreciated. What you're describing is a family system that designated roles early on: your sister as the star, you as the supporter. When you succeeded beyond those parameters, it threatened the entire system. But why can't they just be happy for me? I asked, hearing the childlike hurt in my voice. Because your success challenges their narrative, she explained. If you can be wildly successful, it suggests Rebecca could be too, with the right choices and effort. It's easier to blame your success for her struggles than to examine why she hasn't achieved what they hoped. Session after session, Dr. Levine helped me see the toxic patterns that had shaped our family dynamic. How I'd been seeking parental approval my entire life, measuring my worth by achievements they never fully acknowledged. How their conditional love had created an impossible standard. I needed to be successful enough to support the family, but not so successful that I outshone Rebecca. What do you actually want from this relationship going forward? Dr. Levine asked during our fourth session. The question stumped me. I'd been so focused on earning their approval that I'd never considered what I wanted from them. Respect, I said finally. Recognition that what I've built matters. That I matter not just as a resource or a problem, but as their son. And if they can't give you that, she pressed. I had no answer. December unfolded with no contact from my family. No calls from mom checking in, no texts from dad about the weather or sports, no social media comments from Rebecca. The silence was both painful and clarifying. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, I realized they were waiting for me to cave, to apologize for not immediately agreeing to their demand. As Christmas approached, the invitations piled up: holiday parties, industry events, friends gatherings. I declined them all, not trusting myself to maintain the facade of holiday cheer. Instead, I booked a cabin in Big Sur, planning to spend the holiday alone with books and ocean views. 2 days before Christmas, as I was packing for my solitary retreat, Rebecca called. Seeing her name on my screen sent a jolt of both hope and anxiety through me. Jason. Her voice sounded small, lacking the dramatic flair she typically affected. Are you coming home for Christmas? The question caught me off guard. I didn't think I'd be welcome, I said carefully. Don't be ridiculous, she said, a hint of her usual dismissiveness returning. Of course you're welcome. Your family. Am I? Because Thanksgiving didn't feel that way. A pause stretched between us. Look, she finally said. I know that conversation was uncomfortable. Uncomfortable, I interrupted, months of hurt crystallizing into anger. You all asked me to change my legal identity because my success is inconvenient for you. That's beyond uncomfortable, Rebecca. You don't understand how hard it is, she shot back, her voice rising. Every audition, every callback, it's always there. The comparison, the questions about you. Oh, you're Jason Reynolds' sister, never just Rebecca the actress. You stole my spotlight before I even had a chance to stand in it. Her words hung in the air between us, the raw truth of her perspective finally laid bare. In her mind, I had stolen something that was rightfully hers. Attention, recognition, success. I never asked for a spotlight, I said quietly. I just worked hard and built something people found valuable. It's easy for you to say that from your penthouse or corner office or wherever you are right now, she snapped. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment, Rebecca. I drive a 4-year-old car. I work hard because I care about what I'm building, not for status or attention. Whatever she said, the word dismissing my entire reality. Are you coming for Christmas or not? Mom's already stressed about planning the menu. The request, with no acknowledgement of Thanksgiving, no apology, no recognition of how deeply they had hurt me, clarified everything. They didn't want me. They wanted the role I played in their family system. The reliable son who would show up, bring expensive gifts, maybe write another check and absorb whatever emotional manipulation they dished out. No, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. I'm not coming. And I think we all need some time to reconsider what kind of relationship we want going forward. Seriously. You're ditching family Christmas over one little discussion. God, you've gotten so full of yourself. I ended the call, my hand shaking slightly. Then I sat down and wrote an email to my parents. Not a reactive, emotional outburst, but a thoughtful expression of how their request had made me feel and what I needed from them if we were to have a healthy relationship going forward. I explained that I would always be there to support them and Rebecca in appropriate ways, but I would no longer accept being made to feel that my success was a problem to be solved. I didn't send it right away. I sat with it, edited it, made sure it expressed my boundaries clearly but without unnecessary hurt. Then I pressed send and turned off my phone. Instead of Big Sir, I accepted Miguel's invitation to join his family for Christmas. His parents had moved from Puerto Rico to California when he was 10, and their home vibrated with warmth, music, and genuine affection. His mother hugged me like a son. His father insisted I try his homemade coquito, and his sisters teased me about my terrible dancing when they pulled me into their traditional celebrations. Tell us about this amazing company you built, his father said during dinner, leaning forward with genuine interest. As I explained Connectr's mission and growth, the entire family listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions. When Miguel added stories about our early days working from the garage, they laughed and clapped me on the back, celebrating the journey rather than just the outcome. You must be so proud, Miguel's mother said, touching my arm gently. To build something from nothing but your ideas and hard work. Her simple acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. This was what family should feel like, a safe harbor of unconditional support, not a marketplace where love was earned through compliance with others' expectations. As midnight approached, Miguel found me on the porch looking at the stars while the family celebrated inside. You okay? He asked, handing me another coquito. I think I am, I said, realizing it was true. I just never knew family could be like this. Like what? Supportive without conditions. Proud without competition. Just loving each other for who we are, not what we achieve. Miguel leaned against the railing beside me. That's the whole point of family, man. I nodded, feeling something shift inside me, a letting go of the family narrative I'd been trapped in, and an opening toward a new understanding of what I deserved in relationships. I think I need to rebuild my definition of family from scratch, I said. Good thing you're pretty good at building things, Miguel replied with a smile. January arrived with San Francisco's characteristic fog and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The holiday break spent hiking coastal trails, reading books I'd long postponed, and engaging in honest conversations with friends I'd neglected during my workaholic phase had given me perspective. Dr. Levine's words echoed in my mind. You can't change them, but you can change how you engage with them. I decided it was time to address the situation directly, not through angry phone calls or carefully worded emails, but face to face. Rebecca was the logical starting point. The sibling relationship seemed potentially salvageable in a way my relationship with my parents might not be. I texted her, suggesting we meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between LA and San Francisco. To my surprise, she agreed, though her response, "Fine, but I'm busy." So I only have an hour, maintained her characteristic defensiveness. The cafe I chose was a quiet place near San Luis Obispo, with outdoor seating overlooking rolling hills. I arrived early, securing a private table away from other patrons. Rebecca arrived 20 minutes late, sunglasses on despite the overcast day, her body language closed and guarded as she slid into the seat across from me. "Thanks for coming," I said, pushing a latte toward her oat milk with an extra shot the way she'd always ordered. She seemed surprised I remembered this detail. "I had a casting thing nearby anyway," she said, though we both knew this was unlikely given our meeting location. We exchanged awkward small talk about the drive and the weather before I gently steered the conversation toward its purpose. "Rebecca, I've been thinking a lot about Thanksgiving and our conversation on Christmas Eve," I began. "Not just those incidents, but our whole relationship over the years." She stiffened, fingers tightening around her cup. "If this is some kind of intervention..." "It's not," I assured her. "It's just... I think we're both operating from scripts written for us when we were kids. You as the star, me as the supporting character. But we're adults now. We can rewrite those roles." "That's easy for you to say," she said, but with less venom than before. "You got the success story." "Did I?" I asked. "Because from my perspective, I spent my childhood desperately trying to earn attention that was automatically given to you. Every achievement was measured against your potential, never valued on its own merits." I expected her to argue to maintain the narrative our parents had constructed. Instead, she stared into her coffee, a small crease forming between her eyebrows. "I used to hate how easy everything seemed for you," she said finally. "You always knew exactly what you wanted, and how to get it. I just knew I wanted people to look at me, to see me." "Nothing was easy," I countered gently. "I worked multiple jobs through college. Miguel and I lived on ramen for 2 years building Connectr. The difference was, I chose my path because I loved the work itself, not because I was chasing approval." She removed her sunglasses, revealing reddened eyes. "You know what the worst part is? I don't even know if I want to act anymore. I've been doing it so long because it's what Mom and Dad expect, what they've invested in. I don't know who I am without that identity." Her admission stunned me. All these years I'd assumed she was living her dream while I was pursuing mine alone. The idea that she might be as trapped in our parents' expectations as I had been shifted something fundamental in my understanding of our family dynamic. "What would you do if you could do anything?" I asked. "If Mom and Dad's approval wasn't a factor?" She looked up, genuine emotion crossing her face for the first time. "Honestly, I love being behind the camera more than in front of it. I've been helping direct some indie projects, working with the cinematographer. That's when I feel alive, not when I'm reciting someone else's lines." "Why haven't you pursued that?" "Mom would be devastated," she said simply. "After all they've invested in my acting career. The loans, the classes, the showcases. And Dad always says there are no jobs in independent filmmaking." I leaned forward, seeing my sister, really seeing her, perhaps for the first time in our adult lives. "Rebecca, you're 28 years old. At what point do you get to live for yourself instead of them?" She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "It's not that simple." "It can be," I said. "What if you had the freedom to explore directing without financial pressure? What if you could learn the craft properly, not just picking it up on set?" Like film school, she asked, a hint of longing in her voice. "I've thought about it, but it's expensive, and I'd have to stop auditioning to attend classes. Mom and Dad would never support that pivot." "I would," I said simply. She looked at me suspiciously. "Why would you do that after everything?" "Because you're my sister. Because maybe both of us have been trapped in roles we didn't choose. Because I want you to have the chance to find your passion on your own terms, the way I was fortunate enough to find mine." For the first time in years, perhaps since childhood, we had an honest conversation. Rebecca admitted how crushing the constant pressure to make it had become, how each passing year of minimal success made her feel increasingly like a failure. I shared how isolated I'd felt in my achievements, how the family's inability to celebrate my success had hollowed out what should have been joyful milestones. "I never asked them to change their names for me," I said, the hurt still fresh. "I never expected them to pretend to be someone else to make my path easier." Rebecca winced. That was Mom's idea initially. She read some article about siblings of famous people changing their names to establish separate identities. Dad latched onto it as a solution. And you? Did you want me to do it? She looked ashamed. I was frustrated. Jealous, if I'm being honest. It seemed like a way to create some separation, to not always be in your shadow. She paused. But I know it was wrong to ask that of you. I'm sorry, Jason. Her apology, the first from any family member, landed like a healing balm on a wound I hadn't realized was still so raw. What do we do now? She asked, vulnerability replacing her usual defensive posture. I think we start by being honest with Mom and Dad, I suggested. Together, if you're willing. They need to understand that their expectations have been damaging to both of us, just in different ways. She nodded slowly. They won't take it well. Probably not at first, I agreed. But I think it's necessary if we want any kind of healthy relationship going forward. We scheduled a video call with our parents for the following weekend. Rebecca would be in her apartment in LA. I in San Francisco. Our parents in Seattle. A digital family meeting across the West Coast. When the call connected, our parents' faces appeared side by side, Mom's expression hopeful, Dad's cautious. Hi kids, Mom said brightly, as though the Thanksgiving disaster had never happened. It's so good to see you both together, even if it's just on screen. I let Rebecca take the lead, as we'd agreed. Mom, Dad, she began, her voice steadier than I expected. Jason and I have been talking about some important things. About our careers, our relationship as siblings, and the dynamics in our family. Their expressions shifted, Mom's smile fading, Dad's eyebrows drawing together. What dynamics? Dad asked warily. Rebecca took a deep breath. I've been thinking a lot about my acting career, and I've realized something important. I'm not sure it's what I truly want anymore. Mom's hand flew to her chest. What are you talking about? Of course it is. You've wanted this since you were 6 years old. No, Mom, Rebecca said gently. You've wanted it for me since I was 6. And I went along with it because I loved how proud it made you. But the truth is, I'm more passionate about directing and production than acting. That's just because you haven't gotten the right role yet. Mom insisted, panic rising in her voice. Once you get that breakthrough part. Karen, Dad interjected, putting his hand on her arm. Let her finish. Rebecca continued, explaining her growing interest in directing, the fulfillment she found in that aspect of filmmaking. As she spoke, Mom's expression cycled through disbelief, hurt, and something approaching anger. When Rebecca finished, Mom turned her attention to me. This is your doing, isn't it? You've always been jealous of the special talent Rebecca has. The accusation was so backward, so completely contrary to reality, that I actually laughed, a short, surprised sound that clearly wasn't the reaction she expected. Mom, I've spent my entire adult life supporting Rebecca's acting career financially and emotionally. But maybe the most supportive thing I can do now is help her explore what truly makes her happy, not what you want for her. How dare you, Mom exploded. After all, we've sacrificed. That's exactly the problem, I interrupted, my voice firm but calm. You see your support as a sacrifice that creates an obligation. Real support comes without those strings attached. Dad, surprisingly, was the first to show a glimmer of understanding. You two have been talking about this together, he asked, looking between our video feeds. We both nodded. And this directing thing, it's really what you want, Becca? He asked her directly. It is, Dad, she said, the nickname he'd used when she was small seeming to soften him further. I feel alive when I'm doing it in a way I never have with acting. He nodded slowly, a calculated look in his eyes that I recognized from childhood. He was running numbers, considering angles. Film school costs about the same as all these acting coaches and showcases, I suppose. I'm offering to cover Rebecca's education, I said. Not as a loan or an investment, but as a gift. Because she's my sister, and I want her to have the freedom to find her path. Mom stood abruptly, walking off camera, the sound of a door slamming following her exit. Dad sighed, suddenly looking older than his 62 years. She's taking this hard. You have to understand, Your mother has been focused on Rebecca's acting career for so long she doesn't know who she is without it. I know exactly how that feels, Rebecca said quietly. Dad looked at her with new eyes, perhaps seeing his adult daughter clearly for the first time rather than the vessel for unfulfilled dreams she had been. And you, he said, turning to me. I owe you an apology, son. That request at Thanksgiving, it was out of line. I got caught up in trying to fix things for Rebecca without considering what it meant to ask that of you. His apology, though imperfect, was sincere, the first acknowledgement from either parent that they had crossed a boundary. I appreciate that, Dad, I said. I've never wanted to compete with Rebecca. I just want us all to support each other's actual dreams, not the ones assigned to us. He nodded, a tired smile crossing his face. When did you two get so wise? Therapy helps, I admitted with a small smile of my own. We agreed to meet in person the following month, all four of us, including Mom, when she was ready with a family therapist I would arrange. It wouldn't be easy, and there was no guarantee Mom would ever fully accept the new direction, but it was a start. As the call ended, Rebecca and I stayed connected for a moment longer. That went better than I expected, she said. With Dad, at least, I agreed. Mom will take more time. Thank you, she said suddenly, her expression earnest. Not just for the film school offer, but for seeing me, the real me, not the actress Mom wanted me to be. That's what siblings are supposed to do, I said. See each other clearly and support each other anyway. For the first time in our adult lives, I felt like we were truly brother and sister. Not competitors, not roles in a family drama, but two people with a shared history working toward an authentic relationship. 6 months passed, bringing with them profound changes in my family's landscape. The metaphorical earthquake of Rebecca's career pivot and my boundary setting had initially caused fractures, but as the dust settled, a new, more stable foundation began to emerge. Rebecca enrolled in USC's School of Cinematic Arts, focusing on directing and production. I covered her tuition, as promised, but more importantly, I watched her come alive in a way I'd never seen during her acting years. She called me regularly with genuine excitement about her projects, her professors, the collaborative process of filmmaking from behind the camera. I'm making a short film for my final project. She told me during one of our weekly video chats, her face animated in a way that reminded me of the little sister who used to put on shows in our living room before the pressure and expectations had dimmed her natural enthusiasm. It's about siblings who communicate through a fantasy world because they can't connect in reality. Sounds somewhat familiar, I said with a smile. She laughed, maybe slightly autobiographical. Would you want to see the rough cut when it's done? I could use your feedback. The request, casual, genuine, with no ulterior motive, represented everything that had changed between us. She wasn't asking for connections or funding or to leverage my name. She simply valued my opinion. Our parents' journey was more complicated. Mom initially refused to engage with the family therapy sessions, sending Dad alone to represent them both. Dr. Williams, the family therapist I'd found who specialized in adult family dynamics, worked patiently with the three of us while leaving space for Mom to join when ready. Dad surprised us all with his willingness to examine the family patterns once they were pointed out. In our third session, he made a breakthrough that brought tears to my eyes. I think I pushed Rebecca toward acting because Karen was so invested in it, and I pushed Jason toward practical success because I needed to believe someone in the family would be financially stable, he admitted. I never stopped to ask what either of you actually wanted. Mom finally joined us for the 6th session, still resistant but present. Her journey toward acceptance was slower, marked by setbacks and difficult conversations. But by month 4, she had stopped referring to Rebecca's directing program as a temporary detour and started asking genuine questions about her projects. The real turning point came when Rebecca's first short film was selected for a student showcase. She invited us all, her first public acknowledgement of her new path. I flew to LA for the screening, meeting my parents at the theater. Mom seemed tense, but made an effort, dressed formally as though attending one of Rebecca's acting premieres. The film was raw but showed genuine talent, a 10-minute story told with visual flair and emotional nuance that many seasoned directors would envy. As the credits rolled and the audience applauded, I glanced at my mother and saw tears streaming down her face. Later at dinner, she reached across the table and took Rebecca's hand. I didn't understand before she said quietly, "But watching that film, I could feel you in every frame. This is what you're meant to do." It wasn't a complete resolution. Decades of dysfunctional patterns couldn't be unwound in 6 months. But it was a significant step toward healing. My own life evolved during this period as well. Connectr continued to thrive, but I found myself delegating more, trusting my team to execute our vision while I reclaimed time for myself. I started dating Emma, a marine biologist I met through a conservation organization I supported. She was refreshingly unimpressed by my business success, more interested in my thoughts on ocean acidification than my company's stock price. "What I like about you," she told me one evening as we walked along Baker Beach, "is that you seem to know the difference between what you do and who you are." It was a distinction I had struggled to establish for years, separating my identity from my achievements, my worth from my productivity. The family work had helped me see how deeply those patterns had been ingrained, how I had sought through success, the validation that had been conditional in my childhood. In July, I invited everyone to San Francisco for the 5th anniversary celebration of Connectr's launch. It would be the first time my parents had ever visited my company or seen this significant part of my life. I was nervous but hopeful. The event was held at the Museum of Modern Art with hundreds of employees, investors, and partners in attendance. I spotted my parents and Rebecca as they entered, looking somewhat overwhelmed by the scale of it all. Miguel intercepted them, playing host while I finished speaking with some key investors. When I joined them, Dad looked around the room with an expression I couldn't quite read. "All of this," he said, gesturing to the crowd, the space, the Connectr logos projected on the walls. "You built this." It wasn't a question, but a realization, perhaps his first true acknowledgement of what I had created. Later, as the formal program ended and guests mingled with cocktails, Dad found me alone near the bar. "I need to say something," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I've been wrong about a lot of things, Jason, but nothing more than how I've treated your success." I waited, giving him space to continue. "I was so focused on what Rebecca needed that I never stopped to really see what you'd accomplished. And then, when you became more successful than I could have imagined, I think I was intimidated, maybe even jealous." His honesty caught me off guard. "Dad." "No, let me finish," he insisted. "That day at Thanksgiving, asking you to change your name, it was the worst kind of betrayal. I want you to know, I'm deeply ashamed of that, and I'm sorry. Truly sorry." The apology I had wanted for so long, complete, unqualified, sincere, finally arrived. And I discovered that in the months of therapy and self-reflection, its importance had diminished. I no longer needed his validation to know my worth. But I welcomed it nonetheless. "Thank you," I said, simply offering my hand. He ignored it and pulled me into a hug instead, something he hadn't done since I was a child. Mom was making smaller steps, but genuine ones. She still occasionally slipped into old patterns, asking if I could mention Rebecca to some of these Hollywood types here, but caught herself more often than not. As I watched my family interact with my colleagues, saw them finally engaging with this enormous part of my life they had previously minimized, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The pain of that Thanksgiving confrontation had been necessary, the catalyst for breaking patterns that would have continued indefinitely without intervention. Standing up for myself hadn't been selfish. It had been necessary for everyone's growth. By refusing to diminish my light, I had created space for Rebecca to find her authentic path, rather than living in the shadow of expectations. By setting boundaries with my parents, I had given them the opportunity to develop healthier relationships with both their adult children. 2 weeks after the anniversary event, I launched a new initiative through Connectr, a foundation providing mentorship and seed funding to young entrepreneurs from backgrounds without family support or connections. The first cohort included 20 brilliant young innovators whose circumstances mirrored aspects of my own journey, but who lacked the educational opportunities I'd been fortunate enough to secure. During the foundation's launch event, a young reporter asked what had inspired the initiative. "I believe everyone deserves the chance to build something meaningful," I said, without having to apologize for their ambitions or success. Sometimes the hardest part of the journey isn't creating something new, it's believing you have the right to try. That evening I received a text from Rebecca. Saw your foundation launch online. So proud to be your sister. The real Jason Reynolds sister. The journey from that devastating Thanksgiving to this moment hadn't been easy. There were still difficult conversations ahead, patterns to unlearn, new ways of relating to establish. But the fundamental shift had occurred from a family defined by competition and conditional approval to one learning, however imperfectly, to celebrate each member's authentic path. The most profound lesson I'd learned was this: sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for those around you is to refuse to become smaller to make others comfortable. By standing in my truth and holding firm to my identity, I had created the possibility for genuine connection based on who we really were, not the roles we had been assigned. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family pressure? How did you balance maintaining your identity with preserving important relationships? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your authentic path. Remember, your success never needs an apology, and neither does your true self. Thank you for listening, and I wish you courage in your own journey.